Hey everyone, this is Dr. Everson coming to you again with another video, looking a little bit closer at the conquest uh, with Joshua and the Israelites, and in particular looking at the destruction of Jericho and Ai. And there's this Hebrew word cherem, which refers to complete destruction. And if we have a loving God, how is it that he commands he commands Joshua to destroy every man, woman, and child in order to acquire the land? And so this has been troubling for some, and we touched on it briefly in the regular lecture on Joshua and the conquest. But I thought we'd take a bit of a closer look. I'm just going to share with you a couple of perspectives, namely Geisler and Gleason Archer. Gleason Archer, I think I referred to this book before, has the old standard Encyclopedia of Bible Difficulties, and then Norman Geisler and Thomas Howe have the so-called Big Book of Bible Difficulties, and both of them come up with a similar explanation, defense for Joshua and the conquest. And maybe you'll find these useful. There's another perspective I'll share that deals with it from a different angle that I prefer, but these thoughts are useful as well. And the first point that they start off with is that Joshua was really following a divine command, and so this comes from God. This doesn't come from man. And so if you're going to take issue with the conquest, you need to take issue with God. And I think for some, when they have difficulty with Joshua and they don't like the ethics of it, they feel it's immoral what Joshua was doing, they might have a different view of Scripture, and that maybe they don't believe these things happened, or they believe God gets it wrong. And of course, if you believe God gets it wrong, you have other theological problems to contend with, and this brings me back to the way Keller and C.S. Lewis often talk about ethics. That is to say, if God gets it wrong, how do you know? What are you basing this upon? Or in terms of theodicy, I mentioned, I think before, Keller in this discussion he has in the Veritas Forum at, I believe it was at Princeton, and his discussion with Martin Bashir and then one of their professors. And he says, the problem of evil turns a lot of people away from God. And for Keller, and for Lewis too, this actually makes things worse. That is to say, if there is no God, there actually is no evil. Because you lose your moral basis for right and wrong. How do you know what is good? How do you know what is bad? If it's something that we all determine as individuals, well, then you go down to the path of relativism, which really means there is no good or there is no evil. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold this week. And Jean-Paul Sartre argues for this, I think, with the most intellectual honesty among the modern existentialists. If you look at Foucault or Camus or Heidegger or Sartre or Nietzsche, I think Sartre is sort of the most intellectually honest, where he says, right, God is dead and there are no rules. And so, this is a command that comes from God, and God is the source of all goodness. And so God would not be the source of evil if he is the source of all that is good. And so that's something worth considering at the start of things. Also, Archer and Geisler both point to the covenant ceremony, this interesting, strange covenant ceremony of Abraham, where he goes into this deep sleep. And he says that a period of 400 years must transpire because the wickedness of the Canaanites is not yet complete. And so this is presumably there's an amount of time that passes so that the Canaanites might turn from their ways and avoid judgment, avoid destruction. And this would be consistent throughout the Bible when it comes to God's mercy and justice. That is to say, God gives ample opportunities to turn from evil before the consequences come down upon whoever. And a passage that comes to mind for me in thinking about this point would be Ezekiel 33:11, where God says through the prophet, I do not desire the death of the wicked. Rather, I wish that they would turn from their evil and live. And so perhaps that's the idea here in Genesis 15:16. Moving down a little farther, Canaanites were not innocent. Okay, sorry, my grammar on that. The Canaanites were not innocent. Me no right good, sorry. But they both talk this way, and the biblical text will talk about the wickedness of the Canaanites, and people who study the ancient Near East will also describe reprehensible behavior of the Canaanites, such as child sacrifice and things like this. And so that's something to consider. And this is the toughest part here. What do you do with children? Children are innocent. In my own sort of ethical system, for me, what sort of sums things up and keeps things simple when it comes to my own behavior and then the behavior of others, I say the golden rule for morality and the silver rule for legality. That's to say, if you want to make a law, enforce your morality on others, well, they need to be doing harm to others. And personally, for myself, I seek to, model my behavior upon the golden rule, which is really hard, obviously. But children are innocent, right? So if they're not hurting others, you shouldn't hurt them. And so what do you do about the children? And Geisler and Archer point to, they both use the term cancerous, or they use the metaphor of surgery, right? So you have to cut out the evil because it has grown to such a severe point. And so there's sort of no choice in the matter, right? If God is going to create a nation for the Israelites, then these children must be destroyed along with their parents, because there's no other choice. And then they both point to, and this one is it's a little easier to stomach, but it's the idea that God is sovereign over life. God is the creator and we are the creation. And it's sort of a trust in God that God does the right thing. And so it might be hard for us to understand, but we trust in him. Okay, for what's that's worth, there are a few points from them. There's a fifth point that I didn't add there if you want to do a little more reading yourself, but there's four of their main. Another discussion of this, and I'll post the few pages he writes on this by Richard Hess. Richard Hess teaches out in Denver. He's a fellow Hebrew Union College guy, and so maybe I'm biased with how he's referring to Walton and now Hess because I'm an HUC person myself. Anyway, Richard Hess in the very large textbook on apologetics by Douglas Groothuis, there's a couple of appendices in the back that Richard Hess has written. And again, sorry for my cold, I'm pretty sniffly. But he deals with the language or the term for city that's used. So in the description of the destruction of Jericho, and then also the call for the destruction at the end of Deuteronomy, in Deuteronomy 28, the term that's given there is Ir. And it might be helpful to talk about the polis, the idea of a city-state in the ancient world. Maybe you've heard of the idea of polis from discussions of ancient Greek culture, but a similar way of life occurred in the ancient Near East as well. Most people did not live inside city walls, right? The city was a place of refuge, right? Most people farmed fields in in the ancient Near East, right? And so you would live near your land. And if there was a threat, you would run to a fortified city to find shelter there. So like Jerusalem, right, would be a fortified city, or Jericho would be a fortified city. And so that would be a place if somebody posed a threat, you could run into the city. And so it's not a place where everybody lived. These became centers of power. They became centers of leadership. This is where you would store a garrison of troops, right? So they were, though the term, here, let me just flip open to the page where he deals with this. I'm on 673 here. He says, the term translated city is Ir. In the Bible, this term can describe a village, tent encampments, and a citadel or fortress such as Zion and Jerusalem. In fact, it seems often to identify a military context. And so here, what was commanded to be destroyed, it's not that every human life in the territory of Canaan should be destroyed. It was a command to focus their destruction, to focus their war efforts on the walled cities. And these were the locations that contained Canaanite leadership and military. And so this is sort of the nature of war, where those who live in an area that is a military target, whether they're a man, a woman, or a child, whether they're innocent or guilty, they live in that target area, and so it's sort of unavoidable. But that sort of softens the blow in a way. It's a, you think about bombing cities in World War II, right? If you lived next to the factory where they manufactured the bombs, well, that's really unfortunate. You might be innocent, but it's more understandable that you would be destroyed, as opposed to a farmer who lives off in a field, right, and is not a military target. Okay, so then Jericho and Ai, the destructions that are described in Joshua, they represent military assaults and not genocide, right? And so that article is helpful, and it's short, so you can read it and you have it there for reference. Anyway, that's just my thoughts on the Exodus. I hope you're all doing well and you don't have a cold like I do. Okay, we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.